So our topic is the exploration of triumph over adversity and persecution. And the question that we want to try and explore with you tonight is, what creates hope? What fosters resilience? But first, we need to make an honest acknowledgement. We are very aware, as we stand before you today as the Christians in this Interfaith series, that it's our tradition that has often been the source of adversity and persecution faced by adherents of other traditions. It was not so in the earliest years of Christianity, but once the church became the established religion of the Roman Empire in the 4th century, it has been very challenging for us Christians to disentangle our religious tradition from the trappings of the empire. And this is something that Will and I are both in earnest about learning to do ourselves and also teaching to those who want to follow Jesus. The principal skill in this endeavor is theological reflection, which helps us to distinguish theology from ideology. So Will is going to share some Christian history with you.
This topic is so appropriate for Christian reflection because Christianity was born out of adversity and in a context of persecution. It's fertile ground that gave birth to a movement within Judaism that became Christianity. So to understand how Christians look at adversity and persecution, you need to get a bit of a sense of what the history is. Palestine under Roman occupation. Rome was strong and commanded allegiance. It was soul-destroying to live under those circumstances. Jesus and the movement that he began was rooted in a vision of a world unoccupied by empire, where allegiance was to God. He taught, preached, healed. He embodied a deep connection with the divine that he both lived and taught, that demonstrated that the powers of oppression and persecution could hurt you. They could even kill you. But they couldn't touch your connection with the divine. That connection is beyond the reach of oppression. And ultimately, even death has no power over the power of love. In the end, that was tested in his own life. He not only taught and healed and preached, but his preaching brought him up against the power of the Roman Empire. And they arrested him and tortured him and killed him. It was a devastating experience for his followers. But in the time following it, they continued to experience him. And no one can put their finger on exactly what that experience was, but what came out of it was the conviction that God had raised him from the dead, had brought him to life again. And so that experience rang true with what he taught. Wait a minute. They couldn't kill it because that love, that power is still here. And they continued to hold on to the teachings, the healing, the belief of Jesus beyond. And they called it a gospel, good news. That gospel continued to spread and continued to be persecuted within the Roman Empire. But there was a writer who wrote, his name was Tertullian, and he wrote, "The blood of the martyrs are the seeds of the church." That is to say, you can destroy our bodies. You can do a lot to us. We can suffer a lot under oppression. But there is a paradox that at the core of that, where in that very experience we deepen our connection with the divine. And the faith is not diminished, it is strengthened. Unfortunately, I would say unfortunately, in the 4th century, Emperor Constantine decided that Christianity would be the religion of the Roman Empire. And so that faith that was born as marginal and persecuted became the imperial faith. And as Cari mentioned, that has created a real problem within Christianity. We went from being a movement to being an institution. Christianity went from holding a marginal and an adversarial relationship with power to being completely identified with power. We went from being the agent of social and political and communal and spiritual change and transformation within the human heart and the human community to being an agent of spiritual comfort to those who were struggling, but not transformation. From offering abundant life in the here and now to offering then some kind of promise of life when the suffering was finally over. The Christian church became a tool of the Roman Empire to control, and we have been disentangling ourselves from our relationship with power ever since. This gospel, this relationship of love with God that cannot be destroyed, and that kind of went underground when we became the imperial church, looked like it was gone, but it's not. It keeps popping up among marginalized peoples, keeps popping up as a movement for social change. It would appear that not only can you not kill Jesus, but you cannot kill that love and the faith as it lives in the human heart and in the human community throughout history. So, what exactly is the core belief that is at the essence of it?
The resources that are in our faith, and what do we turn to in times of adversity? I'd like to just start this little section by making a reference to my face. I don't know if you noticed, and it's pretty faded now. I had some surgery last week. I had a basal cell carcinoma on my forehead removed, and for most of last week, I had a black eye, which turned some lovely colors. You can just see a little bit of yellow here now. It eventually migrated over onto the other side, and I was calling myself Franken-Reverend there for a while. But yeah, most of what happened, I've endured a little bit of pain, a lot of bruising, and some really bad jokes. The Christian scriptures are full of different themes, but there are two major themes which are both encouraging in their own way in times of adversity and challenge. One of them has been called the theology of the cross, and the other the theology of glory. And the theology of glory in broad strokes says, don't worry about what you're suffering now, because awaiting you is an inheritance of glory that outshines the darkness you're experiencing now. You can see how this works in a time of persecution as a source of hope, but you can also see how once Christianity became the religion, the institution of the empire, how that just kept people down. The punchline of this theology does get lived out in different ways within the Christian tradition and at different times, sometimes as patience and endurance, sometimes as an encouragement to engage deeply in action that tries to cooperate with God's purposes, and sometimes in this kind of triumphalistic version of Christianity, in a take-charge mentality that thinks it's up to us to manufacture God's glory. So for me, the theology of glory is not as compelling as the theology of the cross, and I'll explain why. I think that the theology of glory has contributed to the Christian tradition's entanglement with the powers that be. When we're going after glory, we neglect to see our own weakness as part of the human story. When we're seeking glory, we're less likely to look at our neighbors clearly and to receive them as children of God as well. That same duality that you were talking about earlier. So it's the theology of the cross that intrigues and comforts me, as well as challenging me to live closer to the life of Jesus. The theology of the cross says that God can make use of broken vessels like us, human beings. The theology of the cross says that weakness, self-emptying, humility are holy tools for human transformation when they're employed by the divine Spirit. And the theology of the cross acknowledges that while we might be broken and harmed by the powers of empire, that the life that God planted in us is not so easily destroyed. The lure of this theology of the cross for me is that when my heart is right and I'm seeking to be humble and servant-like as Jesus was, then any suffering I know I can feel in solidarity with Jesus' suffering and with the countless others who know sorrow and pain across the world. And any gift of resurrection or glimpse of new life that I receive as a complete gift of grace, not something that I manufacture or make in any way. So last week I submitted to pain and suffering. Of course, I was told it was for my own good, and it's not a life-enhancing thing to have a cancer on your face and leave it to grow there. I think there are so many subtle and not so subtle cancers that we tolerate in our society, which won't be removed without pain and suffering. And the gift of the Christian tradition, and all of our traditions, is that we find resources to help us face the ways we are complicit in our own suffering and our own imprisonment, as well as resources to birth hope and cooperation with the gracious purposes of the divine.
So in terms of the practice of our faith, there are a couple of things that we do and that we hold on to when we deal with adversity and persecution. As a community, we practice rituals. We call them sacraments. Baptism is one of them. It's a sacrament involving water that names every single person as a gift of the divine, as a gift to us, and bless it. Behold, a child of God. We practice a meal ritual called communion, in which we all participate. It's great equalizing. All are equal around the table. And it is a table of, we call it a table of grace. That is, this table does not belong to anybody. It belongs to God. And we receive and offer with utter equality and with respect to the divine in everyone around the table. We practice prayer and worship. We practice staying grounded in the teachings of Jesus, that gospel we were talking about. And Christianity is one of the great sources of resilience and hope within Christianity is the community. It was never intended to be practiced in solitude. It was always a communal faith. And so we become resources for adversity and persecution from one another by God's grace. And finally, there's a couple of, you know that song, they can't take that away from me. You know that one? There are things that can't be taken away from you. And the presence of the divine in you can't be taken away from you. That's one of the core beliefs we hang on to through everything. We believe that God is not neutral. God has a special concern for the poor and the oppressed. Jesus' first sermon was based on the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because God has anointed me to preach good news to the poor, release to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of God's favor. That was the core of it. So God is not neutral about those things. And finally, there is a paradox that the harder you hang on to your life as if you own it, the less you are actually hanging on to, and the less you live. The more you let go of your life, the more you actually live it. Those who want to grasp onto their life will lose it. Those who lose their life will save it, or will actually live it. There's a paradox there, but in adversity, our tendency is to hang on tighter. One of the great resources of our faith is, in the midst of that, to let go, to trust, and through that be transformed. So we have a song that, we have many songs, but one that both of us repeat really regularly is, you start.
Take, oh, take us as we are. Summon out what we shall be.